right, good afternoon, everyone. We welcome you to our webinar, Staying Safe from Exploitation, where we will discuss modern slavery and exploitation in the hotel industry and how to access support and guidance if you feel you or a colleague are in an exploitative situation. My name is Rihanna Nicely. I'm a Policy and Research Partnerships Officer at the Anti-Modern Slavery charity Unseen. I'm joined here by Hillary Agg, Senior Policy and Partnerships Manager at Unseen, and Joy, who is a survivor consultant from our consultant group. We will get started in a moment, but first a few quick housekeeping notes. We are recording this webinar so that it can be posted to our YouTube later. A link will be shared with attendees when the recording is posted. As you may have noticed, cameras and microphones are disabled right now. We ask that you please keep these off during the webinar to maintain participant privacy and reduce the lag on Teams. There will be a 5 to 10 minute Q&A session at the end that is not recorded, during which you can raise your hand to turn on your microphone or put your questions in the chat, and we will answer them either in the chat or in an email following the webinar. We're holding this webinar today because we want to provide you with information about what modern slavery looks like in the hotel industry so you can protect yourself from ending up in an exploitative working situation. As an employee, you have certain rights as a worker in the UK. Violating these rights is at minimum considered labor abuse, but may also be indicators of the deeper issue of labor exploitation. We will talk about these rights and the differences between abuse and exploitation later on in the webinar. This webinar will equip you with the ability to spot the indicators of modern slavery in the hotels you work in and show you how to access support and guidance if you need it. We highly encourage you to share the YouTube link with your colleagues and anyone else you know who may work in the hotel industry so that they can protect themselves too. If you're a professional attending this webinar and have the ability to, we ask that you put a link to the recording on the resources page or other spaces hotels employees might find it. I'll now pass off to Hillary to cover some baseline information about modern slavery, labor abuse, and labor exploitation.
Great, thank you very much, Rihanna. So I'll just move us on. So really just looking to, we thought it would be useful to start off with a very quick outline of what modern slavery is and what it looks like in the UK. So modern slavery is a crime that is happening all around us all of the time, but lots of people just don't know about it. So they might see some of the signs and know that something's not right, but they might only notice a few things and not know what's going on behind the scenes. So it's very under-recognized. It's also underreported because people are afraid of what might happen if they tell someone that they're being exploited. Other people, they might see some signs of it happening, but worry that if they report something that they saw, that perhaps they'll be overreacting or maybe they'll make things worse for the person who's in that harmful situation. And then finally, it's hidden in plain sight. So when people hear the term modern slavery, they might sometimes think that this must mean that people are locked up or hidden from view. But victims and survivors, they're often out in public workplaces. They're working alongside colleagues who might have no idea that they're being controlled or exploited because they're controlled by often invisible things such as debt, threats to them or their families, or control of their documents. So in terms of how much modern slavery is occurring in the UK, there's an estimated 130,000 people living in a situation of modern slavery in the UK at any given time. Every year, more and more people are identified and they're facilitated into support through what's called the National Referral Mechanism. Last year, there were over 23,000 people referred for support. What this tells us is that we're getting better at identifying victims and survivors and supporting them into support. But as you can see, we're still very far short of that 130,000 people that we do need to reach. So modern slavery really is an umbrella term, and it encompasses the crimes of slavery, servitude, forced labor, and human trafficking. It is any work or service that someone is forced to do under the threat of some form of punishment. So someone can be said to be in a situation of modern slavery if they are forced to work, if they are owned or controlled by an employer, if they're treated as a commodity, or if they have restrictions made on their freedoms. The research that we've done suggests that the majority of exploitation that happens to people working in hotels is what's termed labor exploitation or forced labor, but there may be some situations where staff are also subject to sexual exploitation, or they're forced to commit crimes, so criminal exploitation as well. It is really important for us to show the difference between modern slavery, labor exploitation, and another issue, which is labor abuse. As I've just explained, labor exploitation is a form of modern slavery, but labor abuse is not a form of modern slavery. Labor exploitation is always a crime, whereas labor abuse is often not a criminal offence. And the key difference between the two is that someone who is experiencing labor abuse can reasonably leave their job, whereas someone in labor exploitation is not free to leave their employer, and that might be for a range of reasons. Unfortunately, because the things that control a person whilst they're in that exploitative situation, these things are often hidden. Sometimes it can be really difficult to know initially if a situation is labor abuse or labor exploitation. And the first signs of labor exploitation might actually be those signs of labor abuse. So it can be quite difficult as an outsider to recognize the difference. So on the left-hand side here, we have those things that might indicate both labor abuse and labor exploitation. So someone might be underpaid. They may have money taken from their paycheck for things such as accommodation or food. They may be made to overwork, not be provided with any breaks or time away from work. They may live in accommodation that is provided by their employer, which might be in a really bad condition, bad health and safety within the home. Their employer might be verbally abusive towards them, or sexually abusive as well. And there may be poor standards of health and safety in the workplace. But the difference between labor abuse and labor exploitation, that is the things that are in the right-hand column. So these are some of the things that mean it's not possible for someone to leave their circumstances. And so they're trapped into that situation, which is modern slavery. So they may have paid a lot of money to someone to get a job or to travel to the UK, and it's not possible for them to pay that money back on the wage they're on, so they're trapped in the situation. Their exploiter, they may use their immigration status as a control method, threatening to revoke their visa or perhaps to report them to authorities. They might be taking control of their identity documents, so they're not able to leave and find another job. They might also threaten the employee, their families, with violence or with something else. They might subject the person to actual physical violence as a means of control, and they might be threatened with homelessness, or they might be closely monitored within their home as well. The exploiter, they might take control of their bank account or money so they don't have the means to leave. And their exploiter may exploit something about the person themselves, such as a drug dependency, to control them. So it is these control methods, the things that make an employer able to prevent that person from leaving easily, which makes the situation modern slavery rather than labor abuse. But it is not all about the technicalities at all. It's all about the people, really, isn't it? So I was going to hand over to Joy to take us through a case study, but I'm not sure that have we got Joy on the line? Because if not, I can go through this situation. So it is always so hard to convey when we're talking about modern slavery statistics, the definitions, the scale of harm that each of these cases has caused. So we're going to talk about the risk factors in a little bit, but I want to share a little bit about what this has looked like for one individual. His name is Abul Kamal Azad, and he left his wife and his young son at home in Bangladesh to take up work as a tandoori chef in London. He had responded to an advert in a newspaper. But when he called his new employer from the airport, he was told that the plan had changed. He was told to take transport across the UK to Glasgow, where he was met by a man who he had been previously having some contact with and corresponding about this job. He was driven to a remote hotel in the Highlands, where he was told that he must pay £5,000 to cover the fees of his visa. But when he had paid that amount, he was asked for more. He was provided with a contract for £18,000 and thought that even with these higher fees, that he'd be able to make money on the 3-year contract. So he borrowed more money and sold land, and he even sold his wife's jewelry in order to pay this amount. He was set to work as the sole employee in a 37-bedroom hotel. He was doing the cooking, the cleaning, doing the gardening. But when he asked for his wages, his employer dismissed his concerns. He grew very angry at Abul, and then Abul was essentially drip-fed small amounts of funds. His passport was taken from him and they threatened to cancel his visa sponsorship. He was beaten and he was burned with hot oil as well. He was sleeping in a derelict caravan in the Scottish winter. And as you can imagine, it was incredibly bad for his health, and his health really suffered as a result of this exploitation. But he was remaining in what's termed a hope trap. So he was unable to move in any direction, really. He was really desperate that his situation would somehow improve. Not all exploitation hotels does follow this exact model. He was directly recruited and trapped into working in a small to medium-sized hotel by his exploiter, whereas others, they might be subject to exploitation by an agency that then contracts out their labor to larger hotels. But there are many overlaps in these models, such as the use of debt bondage, false promises about the work that they'll be doing, and then the threat of immigration control and tied accommodation as well. So hopefully that has brought to life a little bit the reality of the people who are in these exploitative situations. And I will hand over to Rihanna next.
So we're going to talk just a little bit about workers' rights, particularly in the context of this modern slavery situation. In the UK, both domestic and international workers and employees are entitled to certain rights regarding payment, working hours and leave, protection from discrimination, health and safety, and whistleblowing. Employees and some workers also have the rights to things like statutory pay for sick, bereavement, and family leave. Agency workers have slightly different rights, but are still covered by payment, working hours and holidays, anti-discrimination, and health and safety. Additionally, after 12 weeks working in the same role, agency workers are entitled to the same benefits and pay as their directly employed counterparts. The UK has separate legal definitions for workers and employees. On a very basic level, a worker refers to someone who does casual or irregular work, such as freelancers, agency workers, and those on zero-hour contracts. Employees have defined regular working hours. Part-timers may be workers or employees depending on their job arrangement. Both workers and employees, like I said, have the same basic rights, with employees having some extra ones that workers do not have unless it's specified by their employment arrangement. Employees and workers both have the right to be paid the national minimum wage for their age group. It's important that you stay up to date on the current wage level as it does change regularly. You can see that on the current slide, the wages right now and what they will change to in April of 2026. Those wages are protected from unlawful deductions, but there are several reasons that an employer might be able to legally deduct pay. Most of these are not allowed to bring the final wage down to below the national minimum, though. You can find a full list of legal reasons an employer can deduct wages on the website at the bottom of the slide. But if your employer is deducting your wages for anything other than taxes, court orders, etc., you should know exactly why the deduction is happening. You can agree to a deduction for specific things, but it needs to be in writing and cannot drop that wage below the minimum. The biggest exception here is for employer-provided accommodation. This deduction can take your pay below the minimum, and there are very few detailed standards to regulate the quality of the accommodation. However, if your employer accommodation is overcrowded, dirty, lacking necessities, and is generally poor, this might be an indicator of modern slavery and exploitation. In cases of labor exploitation, unlawful deductions, withholding of, or lack of pay is one of the first indicators. On its own, wage violations count as labor abuse and not exploitation, but when combined with other indicators, it can meet the threshold for modern slavery. For this reason, wage violations should be investigated to confirm if it's the only issue involved. All workers and employees are entitled to 5.6 weeks or 28 days worth of paid annual leave. Full-time employees automatically get this much leave for the year, while leave builds up over time for part-timers based on how much they work. You are not required to work more than 48 hours a week unless you voluntarily choose to do that and you have that working arrangement in writing. You also have the right to rest, which is a 20-minute break for shifts longer than 6 hours, with 11 hours between shifts and at least 1 day off per week. These amounts increase for those who are under 18 years old. Again, any violation of these on their own is labor abuse, but not necessarily exploitation. But they often occur in labor exploitation as well, with the exploiters forcing people to work long hours without breaks and not allowing them to take leave even when they're sick. Employers have a duty of care for everyone who visits their workplace. This includes employees and workers, customers, and anyone else who might be there, like inspectors. They must actively take steps to reduce health and safety risks across the premises. Keep a record of their actions, regularly review risks and make changes to address them, and make their health and safety policy clearly defined and accessible to all staff. Exploiters might try to hide poor health and safety conditions by saying they are just part of the job or that they meet the minimum requirement of safety. It is important that you know independently what that minimum safety guideline is so that you can spot when they are failing. Additionally, if your employer refuses to let you see the health and safety policy and there's no senior employee to report to, you should report it to somewhere like the local authority's health department or the health and safety executive, which there's a link for on the screen. If it doesn't feel safe, it probably isn't. It is unlawful to discriminate against someone for things like their age, race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, disability, etc. These are called protected characteristics. Discrimination protection includes direct and indirect discrimination, harassment, and victimization. In a workplace, you are protected from things like unfair dismissal or demotion and unequal pay or employment terms. A whistleblower is someone who reports a wrongdoing, in this case seen at work, that affects others. Legally, they cannot be treated unfairly or fired just for reporting. An exploiter might ignore these rules, discriminate against you or your colleagues, or violate any of the previously mentioned rights, then tell you that if you tell anyone about it, you'll be fired or punished in some other way. It is against the law for them to punish you for reporting, but if you feel unsafe reporting, you can call the organization Protect for guidance on your whistleblowing options. Again, there's a link at the bottom of the screen there. If you think you or a colleague are in a modern slavery situation, you can also anonymously call our own helpline, which will be listed at the end of the webinar. Agency workers are entitled to equal treatment, which means you have the same access as directly employed staff to shared spaces like canteens, car parks, and workplace creches. Additionally, after 12 weeks of working for the same hirer, you're entitled to the same pay, pension, and paid annual leave as directly employed staff who do the same or similar jobs. You're entitled to sick leave, though it may not be paid. You are to be made aware of job vacancies that arise within the hiring company, and if you apply and are accepted, the agency cannot stop you from taking that employment offer. Breaking off or ending the assignment does not require notice unless otherwise stated in the contract, but as mentioned on the previous slide, this termination cannot be based on discrimination or a whistleblowing report. If a hiring company is telling you that you are not allowed to to be in shared spaces, or if they refuse to give you equal pay and benefits after the 12 weeks, these are red flags that the hiring company may be exploiting you. If you are not allowed to take off when sick, particularly if you are threatened with punishment for doing so, by either the company or the agency, this is also a red flag. And if an agency tells you that you cannot leave their employ for one reason or another, they may be exploiting you. Violating any of the rights that we've talked about, at the very least, is considered labor abuse. But as mentioned earlier, if they are combined, highly severe, and create a situation where you feel like you cannot leave your employer for one reason or another, then the situation has crossed into the territory of labor exploitation. If you find yourself in this situation, know that there are people ready to help and guide you to safety. Modern slavery and labor exploitation have plenty of signs that you should look out for in your own employment arrangement and in that of your colleagues. As we've been discussing, major violations of workers' rights are a red flag. This might look like your paycheck coming in and being smaller than expected, having unexplained or unreasonable deductions, or simply not being paid at all. It might be the small, cramped flat that your employer provided you that you share with 5 other people, yet have to pay £600 for in rent, or being forced to work long hours or in unsafe conditions and being threatened with being fired or having a visa canceled if you don't do the work. Another massive indicator is if your employer or someone else in the workplace has asked you for your passport and not returned it, even if they say it's for safety. Employers are not allowed to keep are only allowed to keep copies of passports and not the originals. This is a common tactic used by exploiters to prevent people from leaving, traveling, or proving who they are. People in these exploitative situations are often threatened or may be controlled in some way. They may not be allowed to move out of the poor housing, or are highly monitored at work, or are threatened if they express concerns or say that they want to quit. These controlling situations can make people reluctant to speak up and seek help. They may be standoffish, withdrawn, or anxious, or even aggressive. They may not be allowed to or able to take care of themselves and show signs of exhaustion, bad health or hygiene, or have other injuries. Generally, if you feel unsafe in a situation or that your basic needs aren't being met, it's highly likely your employer is treating you in an illegal way. The more signs and the higher the level of control, the more likely it is that it's labor exploitation and not just abuse. It is essential that you keep an eye out for these signs in yourself and colleagues. And if you have any concerns about how your employer is treating you, Hillary here will tell you how to access support.
Thank you, Rihanna. I've just put into the chat bar as well. So on our organisation's website, there's a lot more detail around the signs to spot, and that includes a breakdown of indicators per exploitation type. So today we've very much been talking about labour exploitation. There are a lot of crossovers between the indicators that we've listed here for labour exploitation and other forms of exploitation, such as sexual exploitation and criminal exploitation. But please do go away and take a look at our website there and familiarize yourself with all these different indicators to spot. So what I'd like to talk about next is the support that's available for people who might be at risk or have experienced modern slavery. So this is something that's available through what's called the UK National Referral Mechanism. So anyone who's experienced exploitation in the UK is entitled to support, and that is true if that exploitation is currently happening or if it happened in the past, so historic exploitation. Similarly, you're entitled to you're entitled to support if you experienced exploitation in another country as well. So it's not limited to just the here and the now. And these are the sorts of things that people are entitled to. They have enshrined rights to access. So they will be provided with safety and protection from their exploiter. That might look like safe housing. They might be supported to move to another area of the country, for example. They'll also be provided with subsistence, so financial support, money whilst they are in support. They'll be provided with a caseworker who will be there to guide them through any systems they might need to access, and ensure that they do get the rights that they are entitled to. They will have things such as mental health support and legal support as well. If people need additional assistance such as translation, then that will be provided through this support system, through the national referral mechanism. Again, we will drop a link into the chat which can tell you a little bit more about what that support looks like, the pros and cons of that support, and additional information. So in terms of how to access that support, we are the UK Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline. So Unseen runs that helpline. And that is a free helpline that anyone can call. So you can stay completely anonymous if you want to, and we'll only refer a situation onto another organisation if you give your consent as the caller. We can provide advice, guidance about the support that's available, what will happen if you do ask for that support. And we can also refer a situation on to another agency, such as the police, if you give your consent as the caller. You can also call to report concerns about modern slavery happening to someone else. And of course, you can always give that number to someone if you think that they need some help, but perhaps need a little bit more time to feel like they're ready to ask for or to accept help. The Modern Slavery Helpline is very much for modern slavery. So I hope we've been able to convey today what the difference between labour exploitation and labour abuse looks like. So please do call this helpline if you think that you've spotted modern slavery exploitation, labour exploitation. If you think that perhaps you've identified a situation which is more like labour abuse, then there are other agencies which are more appropriate to contact in those situations. So the HMRC, the National Minimum Wage Team, they can support if someone is not being paid the correct amount, for example. And then, of course, if you or anyone else is in immediate danger, please do call the police on 999 for emergency support. So we're going to leave it there for the moment. We're going to stop the recording and open it up to questions if you have any. But first, just a huge thank